Hi guys, it's G-Economics here, and this afternoon I'm dealing with my current favourite topic of budget lines and indifference curves. I'm dealing with the diagrams on pages 10 and 11 of the Peter Smith OCR textbook. And this afternoon I want to consider with you, to walk through with you, to talk through with you the diagram. I think it's figure 1.1.2 or something like that on your textbook, where we have an increase in the price of apples, but the key thing is that apples are said to be an inferior good. So let's just consider what we mean by this term inferior before we get to the diagram. An inferior good is one, I'm sure you know this from your AS studies of economics, one for which as an individual's income rises, their demand for a specific item will fall. So VHS video recorders, cassette recorders years ago, a great example of this, as people move to superior goods as their income rises. The opposite of that is true as well. As your income falls, then you demand more of it, more of the inferior good, more of the cheaper good. Why? Because you can only afford, potentially, to have more of the inferior good, because when your income falls, it doesn't go as far when you're buying, say, branded products. So, an inferior good is one for which, as income Y rises, the demand will fall, or as income falls, the demand will rise. Now you can consider this in another way, and this is the way you'll need to consider it when you're doing these diagrams. We can say that as the price of apples rises, what effect does that have on your income as price of apples rises? Well, that would lower your income, wouldn't it? So your income would be falling, and hence your demand would be rising. So this would be the same as the price of the particular good in question rising, hence lowering your income, hence demand going up. Or we could say this one here, as the price falls, well, as the price falls, we could say that's the same as your income rising, and hence the demand would fall. Now you can see here that as I've talked to you about this, one word which keeps reoccurring in my explanation is this word income. And so when we're tackling this notion of inferiority, we will only get to it when we start to deal with the income effect. You'll know that on these diagrams we deal with two effects, the substitution effect and the income effect. So don't let this cloud your judgment when we're initially talking about the substitution effect. So let's get to the diagram. So again, we're just carrying on with the OCR textbook example where we've got cola and apples. So we know that apples are the inferior good, but we also know that cola is a normal good, one for which as income rises, demand rises, as income falls, demand falls, as price falls, demand rises, as price rises, demand falls. So that's our normal good. So let's get some budget lines onto the diagram first of all. So I'm going to draw BL1 here. Now I have actually drawn this once already and had to scrap it and start again. And you might find that you'll have to do the same thing just to get the diagram right. I'll give you just a little tip as we go through the diagram where you might want to start it, so you don't have to keep doing it and redoing it as I have had to do. So what happens here? Increase in the price of apples. We know there's no change in income. The budget line will pivot rather than shift. It pivots around this point on the y-axis. Why does it pivot around that point on the y-axis? It pivots around that point because the price of cola remains the same. It's the price of apples that are changing. And so I'm going to draw this. Now I'm going to draw this relatively flat, like so, moving to BL2, and I'll explain why in a moment. So we've got BL2, and we're showing that as a consequence of the price of apples rising, we can potentially consume fewer apples. So now we need to add a starting point A onto the diagram. Now my recommendation is to you, and to make sure this diagram falls right and correctly, imagine there's a dashed line here. We're not going to draw it, but you really need to start point A to the left of that. So I'm going to start my point A about here, and bearing in mind the gradient of that, so I'm going to draw that relatively flat, like so. So that's going to be indifference curve. Now remember, that's indifference curve 2. Why is it indifference curve 2? Because as we move out from the origin, utility and satisfaction is getting bigger. I know, and you know, that we are going to require another indifference curve down here somewhere, which will be indifference curve 1 to indicate a lower level of utility and satisfaction. So this is my starting point A, and this is indifference curve 2. What will the rational consumer do now, ladies and gentlemen, now that the price of apples has gone up? The rational consumer will buy fewer apples because they're more expensive, and more cola because it is relatively cheaper. Might it be possible, ladies and gentlemen, for this individual to maintain this level of utility indicated by indifference curve 2? And remember, the consumer is indifferent between any point on that indifference curve. As long as they're on it, they're indifferent because every point yields the same level of utility and satisfaction. Well, we can show this, can't we? And hopefully if you've watched these videos in series, you'll realise why that's the case. So we take the gradient of budget line 2, which shows the new relative ratio of prices, and we're going to just dash that along, and I'll make it like this deliberately just to show you what you might have to do sometimes. So that's our BL asterisk, that's our shadow budget line. Now you can see on this that I need this indifference curve here, this part of the indifference curve, I need that to be shallower. And so I'm just going to take that out, that part of it, and I'm going to redraw it so that it's just going to be sort of tangential around this point here. Let me just add that back in there, so we've got that going through there like so. And this is my point C. So you will have to, there will be occasions where you'll have to fiddle around with these diagrams to get them to fit properly. So that's my new indifference curve there. Thicken that up a little bit. Now, has this shown what we anticipated in terms of the rational consumer? We said the rational consumer would consume fewer apples, that's to the left of A, and more cola, that is upwards from A. So that is correct. Now you'll know from watching the previous diagram, that movement from A to C, that's the substitution effect. And because we're moving back towards the y-axis, that's a negative effect. So we've got a negative substitution effect going on here. But that's not the whole story here, ladies and gentlemen. And now we come to the whole notion here of inferiority. Inferiority. We know that apples are inferior. We know that the price of apples have increased. As a consequence of that, price of apples increase, income falls, demand for apples actually is going to go up. And so we're going to consume not C of apples, if you take a dashed line down there from C, we're not going to consume that level of apples, we're going to consume a slightly higher level of apples. So we're going to be somewhere to the right of C. Now the next question is, well, what about cola? So we know that in terms of our income has fallen. And we also know that cola is a normal good. And so not only will we be making allowances for the consumption of apples, but the amount of cola we will consume, given that it's the normal good, will be obviously falling. It will be less than we were consuming at A. And so my new equilibrium position is going to be somewhere between C and A, but also it's going to be beneath A. And so this is the new equilibrium position here. IC1, remember, for the lower level of utility, at point B. And so you can see here we've got an increase in the consumption of apples. So we've got, this is a positive income effect. But this positive income effect is not sufficient to entirely outweigh the negative substitution effect. So this movement to the left is stronger than the movement to the right, which is why we end up between A and C. Obviously, if that income effect was stronger than the substitution effect, we could well end up, for example, although this is wrong obviously in this instance, but we could well end up away over here on another indifference curve here. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that's it from me on this one. That's the increase in the price level of apples when apples are an inferior good as modelled by budget lines and indifference curves. I hope that's been of use to you. Keep watching, keep subscribing. Any messages, any questions, send me a message and I'll do my utmost to get back to you. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.